and published her paintings, drawings, and installations. So without further ado, here are Lauren and Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I think I have the pleasure of going first. It is so cool to see everyone here. This is really exciting. I'm really feeling the love. And I'm going to fiddle with my computer just a little bit while I screen share. So bear with me for all that fun. And you tell me when it's working. How do we look, Meg?
It's loading.
It's loading.
Says it's loading, yeah.
Okay. I can see it. Is it up yet?
No.
Oh, let's see. It says it's paused. Why are you paused? Oh.
There you go. Beautiful.
Okay. Okay. All right. So, I wanted to just start with where I grew up. I grew up in Tennessee. Here's an overhead shot of the area where I spent a bulk of my childhood. These are the lands, stolen lands of the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and others. Still learning about these histories, actually. And I grew up experiencing and inventing stories through my interactions with fossils, rocks, trees, animal paths, and country lore. And a lot of my work harkens back to this place and experiences. And I love this passage by Octavia Butler, which I feel like summarizes my art and relationship to my childhood.
Oh, Michelle, we can see your notes.
Oh, my notes. Look at that.
They're awesome, but
can you still see them?
no, they're perfect. You got it.
Okay. Thank you, Lauren. I'll read it. The child in each of us knows paradise. Paradise is home, home as it was, or home as it should have been. Paradise is one's own place, one's own people, one's own world, knowing and known, perhaps even loving and loved. Yet every child is cast from paradise into growth and new community, into vast ongoing change. Octavia E. Butler, Parable of the Sower. And I work mainly with pencil and acrylic ink on a non-porous matte Duralar, and I work on both the front and the back of the piece, and use the translucency to sort of play with the depth. And the surface really allows for chaotic ink spilling as well as fine line work, which is usually pen and pencil or brush. And moving back and forth between the spilling and drawing really suits my kind of different moods. And it also helps me sort of navigate the in-between place and kind of complicate the binary. Hiking and walking is really important to me. That it's completely intertwined with my artistic practice, and as well as kind of shifting location constantly. These are snapshots from walks I've taken in my many homes: Baltimore, New York City, Brooklyn, Seattle, and Port Townsend. And kind of meandering and getting lost, if you know me, is or maybe you don't know this about me, but it's a big part of who I am. And so many other writers say it better than I can. So here's another quote. "Without noticing it, you have traversed a great distance. The strange has become familiar, and the familiar, if not strange, at least awkward or uncomfortable. The journey between near and far are the transitions whereby you cease to be who you were." Rebecca Solnit, who has been a guide for me in thinking about walking and exploring. And this shift from things being familiar into strange happened for me a lot at the beginning of the pandemic as I was taking my walks. Time really slowed down, the streets and skies were quieter, and nature was louder. And my dreams got weirder. I had a dream that I was riding a train through this town of cliffs and houses that were leaning off of cliffs, and water was gushing out of one of the houses. But the people were going about their businesses, not noticing that anything was happening, seemingly. And it was, I was both fascinated and troubled in the dream. So I photographed and collected images of houses and yards on my daily walks, and I spent a good amount of time thinking about and kind of narrowing in on fences, borders, and gateways, and also doorways, and just kind of details in the architecture and landscapes. Thinking about walking space and private space, and noticing how world building was happening kind of in people's yards too. And this brought me to think about what kind of existed between like the housed and the houseless, and also between, you know, kind of human-made and more than human spaces. So lots of different kind of relational things that I was both charmed by and also disturbed and sort of bothered by. So these pieces, you know, sort of move through both of those, through that range of emotions. I never had a tree house, but I've been drawing them for years. Kind of, if you've followed my work at all, you've seen them before. And on these walks, I increasingly became aware of how far humanity has kind of taken being human. And I started using these paintings as a way to play with this disconnect and connection. And Robin Wall Kimmerer, I listened to Braiding Sweetgrass on many of these walks, and I love the way she described what I feel was really happening for me personally. Philosophers call this state of isolation and disconnection species loneliness, a deep, unnamed sadness stemming from estrangement from the rest of creation, from the loss of relationship. If you haven't read this book, go read it. And that book helped me, and it is helping me, hone in on what I'm observing and what I'm separate from and not separate from. This piece is related to having an early memory of learning about how trees become soil and compost. And I remember smushing the soft, moist, splintering cedar where I grew up, and then seeing it here again. In 2010, I visited Vivarium by Mark Diane at the Seattle Art Museum and fell in love with nurse logs. Some of the people I was with on that trip are on this call. In 2019, I explored the wonders of nurse logs with my daughter in the Hoh rainforest. And I started cutting into the paintings. I just kept playing with inserting the cities and houses into these landscapes and thinking about what are these relationships? What can we let decay so that it sprouts new realities? And these next few slides are part of kind of a second group of work that I'm tentatively calling Never Ever. And this work began as an exploration of the relationship between more than human and grief. After experiencing friends with great personal loss and seeing collective loss during the pandemic, I was increasingly kind of thinking about how does the world hold all of this pain? How does the natural world feel our sadness and our joy? And an adjacent imagined world started to come into shape. Islands, plants, rocks, and creatures started to appear in answer to my question. I was illustrating water and earthscapes that were deep within me, places that lived at the intersections of death, change, and wonder. This is called Hybrid Mother. And when I stopped breastfeeding my child, my body underwent new transformations again. And soon after, this creature made it onto the pages of my sketchbook and has just stuck around. It took a little while for me to understand that this was a self-portrait of myself as both child and mother, as human and non-human, and a whole host of other dichotomies. If you're paying attention, you see I like dichotomies, or I'm stuck between them. The hybrid being sees the world through a variety of literal telescopes. They have a bulging empty belly, slow awkward legs, and a tail of flowing living kelp. Their head is a nest of vines and twigs. And the following slides, so including this one, these are all made out of cutout Duralar, painted with acrylic ink, again on both sides, and backed with a wire armature that's then suspended, either pinned into foam core or on the larger pieces hung from above. This piece is called Sink and Sway, and I grew up, collecting the fossils of stalked crinoids, which is an ancient and also still living family of marine animals. And so this is a loose representation of them. And this fuchsia kind of ocean that they're in, I realized is kind of born out of this residency I had with the Disarma Lab group, who study a special halobacterium, which is this magnificent salt-loving, radiation-resistant microorganism, which turns bodies of water, this magenta and purple, and potentially dominated the color of the earth when the earth was in its early stages of life. So I'm super interested in these kind of prehistoric, ancient, and also surviving things that we live with, and the ways they change form. This is mineral mouth, and this is just, I think, really born out of experiences as a child, cracking open geodes and rummaging for fossils, and just sort of a lifelong love of crystals and fractals. And, when I'm working with these, I'm thinking a lot about how humanity consumes rocks and minerals as medicine, uses them as currency, builds with them, all kinds of things. We abuse, revere, covet, and love them. They're pervasive in our lives, and we don't even, think about it. Not all of us think about it all the time. This piece is called Strangle Sing, and this comes out of just a lot of drawings. All these are kind of iterations of drawings I've been making over the years that kind of bloomed into these bigger pieces. But I was first introduced to strangling trees when I visited Costa Rica in 2007. And the roots and the arms of the strangler fig can be invasive, colonizing, adaptive, and protective. In the urban landscape, I see human-made roots and branches everywhere, sewer and water pipes in the earth, and electric and phone lines that interrupt the sky. And over the years, I've just continued to draw these things and meditate on my own relationship to them. This is the last piece. This is called Leak, and I've lived in at least 20 different versions of home. I've kind of lost count. I've lived with a lot of doors. And the door, which I think, a portal, a gate, a barrier, an opening, is loaded with possibilities. How do we make decisions about who we open the door for? And I've drawn this several times. Lauren owns a painting that is an iteration of this. When I was in the middle of starting this one, it was January 6th when the doors of the US Capitol were breached by insurrectionists. And that kind of set the tone for this piece, and had me kind of looking a lot into histories of these architectures and thinking about them in a whole new way. So yeah, what species aside from humans need doors, and what do they say about us? And yeah, I'll just end with this quote, which I hope will sort of just help explain the importance of storytelling and speculative thinking. Thinking is what we are about, and is a materialist practice with other thinkers. And some of the best thinking is done as storytelling. And I've gone over time, as I thought I might, as I warned Lauren I would. Here's a little promo for me if you're not already following me. And thank you. And we will, both Lauren and I will be answering questions after we're done sharing. So I'll pass it to Lauren.
And you'll do stop screen share. So there we go. Great.
Thank you, Michelle. That was great. Um, all right, so I get to share my screen. That all good? Yeah,
Yes, it looks great.
perfect. So thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity. I appreciate how thoughtful and conscientious the gallery has been through this challenging time, this challenging year. And I'm just, of course, thrilled to work with Michelle again. I'll start with where I was when the pandemic first hit, and that will be a good jumping off point for me and a fun element to the story of some of the paintings you'll see at the show at Northwind. So starting in early February 2020, I was a visiting artist at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina, and I was scheduled to be there for 6 weeks. But after the first 3, I knew, like we probably all did, to some degree, that something was wonky in the world. I had initially planned to make 20 paintings in their beautiful studio on campus while engaging with their students. But after 30 days of nonstop work, I had 15 paintings and a sinking suspicion that I needed to come home. The school shut down, I hung up the work and hopped on a plane back to Seattle. After the school finally reopened in fall, I eventually got the work back to my space in Pioneer Square. I was able to keep working through this body of work. So what you see in the show is a mix of my pre-pandemic month in South Carolina and then the past almost year in COVID era Seattle. All of these paintings are components to the same narrative. And they're all 92 by 51 inches, which is about 8 by 4 feet, all either gouache, which is an opaque watercolor, or ink on watercolor paper, all painted horizontally over the course of a highly intense day or 2, maybe 3. And you can see some of the studies that I had that became the larger works. So from there, I'm going to jump back in time to 2014. So in 2014, I moved to Seattle after spending 8 years in Baltimore. I personally love to see other artist studios, so thought I'd share an image from the last space I had there. And as much as I loved my studio, I loved my students, and I loved my community, I knew Baltimore wasn't my forever home, partially because my younger twin siblings had uprooted themselves and moved to Seattle. So I, as of course the nosy older sister, decided to follow them. At that time, I called Michelle. I don't know if she'd remember this, but she's living in New York at the time. And I ran this idea by her, and she said, "Do it. The Pacific Northwest is a dream." And so I did, and it's been a blast. And now my mom lives here too, which is wonderful. But one of the things that happened when I came here is that I suddenly had a much smaller studio. The cost of living was drastically higher than Baltimore, and the only space that I could afford was a fraction of what I was used to. So I decided to downsize my work, and I began obsessively making very small ink drawings. Over the course of several months, I had about 140 of them, and I decided to turn that into a book. Through this relocation process, through starting over, through re-entering or entering a new art world, I decided to invent a backstory. I decided to tell myself a new story about what all the paintings that I had made since finishing grad school in 2008 were about. I decided that they needed to all be in the same place, and that place would be an island that I invented. So I wanted a place for everything to live, a contained location where everything I wanted to make could take place. It was like I gave myself license. And there's a trope in storytelling, and it's really one of my favorite things about storytelling, which is the origin story. And I decided I needed my own origin story. So Michelle and I are both interested in science fiction and fantasy. I think I can say we're both avid readers. We share a lot of the same readings, and avid consumers. as a kid, I read everything, like everything I thought I was supposed to read, and then some more. Just read all the time. I loved comic books as a teenager. And so the book that I was working on, I loosely structured it as a graphic novel, but without any text, because I'm not a writer. So when I thought about this island, I thought about Lord of the Flies. I thought about the TV show Lost. I thought about the movie Escape from New York with Kurt Russell. I loved P.D. James. I thought about The Children of Men. But I wanted to update all of these narratives. So a big part of my drive, what really gets me into the studio, other than my ego, is my frustration with the male gaze. Western art history is dominated by white men. We can all agree with that. As a woman, I wanted to change that narrative. It's probably why I like working large. Women are asked to be smaller, to take up less space, to be slim, to be quiet, and I wanted to take up a lot of space, so I started to do installations. This was the last one that I completed before leaving Baltimore, thanks to Michelle and I's good friend, Renee. My Wi-Fi's catching up, there we go. I do want to put in a disclaimer here. So I'll be using some gendered language, or I'm using gendered language. I don't mean to reinforce the binary. All I mean to do is reference what's already in place. So I don't want to add to the history of objectification of women. And as a cis straight white woman, I'm only interested in painting the objects of my own desire. So there's only really men in my paintings. Somewhere around 2010, I realized too that I needed a muse. I needed some company in the studio with me. And I thought about what the myth of a muse is for most artists in the canon, which is usually a thin, blonde, waifish, weak woman, right? And I was like, that's not what I want. So I settled on, because I'd been a fan of his since I was a teenager, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and he would be my muse. So if you don't know, here's an image in case you've forgotten. He's everything that a muse typically isn't, right? This is a more recent one. He's aged very nicely. So he's been with me in the studio for over 10 years now. He inspires me. He pushes me forward. He keeps me company. He's an athlete. He's a performer. He can sing. He can dance. He's seemingly very self-aware. He's competitive, which I appreciate. He always says he's the hardest worker in the room, so I like to challenge that. He has a sense of humor about himself. He's beautiful, of course. So needless to say, he's been a real asset. So he's helped me create this island, right? On this island, there's only men, only male members of different species, and they they don't really get along. They're trying, but my suspicion is that they'll eventually wipe each other out. Initially, I just wanted to challenge the patriarchy, put my little fist in the air. And I wanted to make fun of it from the outside looking in by populating a whole island, and then I would hover over that island and I would study it like a fantasy anthropologist, kind of a Donna Haraway character. So through this island, I get to ask myself, what are these guys all fighting about? What is there to fight for? Because it's only guys left. Are they there because of a science experiment gone wrong? Is it a sociological setup? Has a natural disaster caused this? Is it post-apocalyptic? What else? Whose version of utopia might this be? Is it dystopia? All I really know is that I love watching what's happening. So after I got a gap grant from Artist Trust in Seattle to publish the first book, which was all in black and white. I started work on a second in color, and I started that at a residency at Mass MoCA, kept it going through my time in South Carolina. And the studies for all of that became a lot of the paintings that you'll see in the show, or larger versions of them. And I'm still building this narrative. So as I'm working on the sequel, the only thing I really know is that the men have all died off and we're just left with the animals. They might come back, I'm not sure. I'm still watching. So what's left are prey animals. They're all masculine symbols. Roosters, snakes, things like that. And they just can't seem to get enough of each other. So I'll leave you with one slide and kind of leave it there so that Michelle and I can start our conversation and open up to questions. But I just want to make sure that I said thank you to everybody for coming on an almost snowy night in Seattle from the East Coast, from far away. And thanks so much to Meg and Michael and Michelle. All right. I'm gonna stop my share. Thank you.
Cool, thank you, Lauren. So do I get to ask you, so we're gonna ask each other questions for a little bit, and then we'll open it up. And Meg, I think people can also, they can input questions into the chat, and you'll keep an eye on that. Is that right?
That's how you want to do it. That's great. Or you
Okay.
can call on folks. They can say, I'd like, they can ask the question, and then I can reveal them, and they can ask it in their own words if you would like that. Up to you. So.
Yeah, why don't you help us pick the questions? Because
Yeah.
it might be hard to keep up. Because I'm just assuming everyone's gonna flood it. I'm just kidding. Everyone's probably sleepy. So Lauren, thank you. We had a lot of time to like kind of noodle over like where we meet and where we're like far away. But the one thing that I think is really distinctive about your practice from mine is it's just like the way you're like this painter's painter. It's the only way I know how to describe it, and I just would actually well, no, here's my question. Do you have a mantra that you use like for painting, or like a way that you always approach a painting? Because you make these really big things, right? And I feel like there's a lot of buildup that must go into that. So like, yeah, talk about painting.
Well, thanks, Michelle. Thanks for that question. And I guess I should say, and we should tell the audience, for those that don't know, that we've known each other for a long time now. We met probably first in 2009 at a residency in Baltimore where we both lived. So we lived down the hallway from each other for a couple of years and got to know each other there, and then kept our friendship going as you moved to New York, and then as we both happened to relocate in the Northwest. So it's fun to talk about this stuff after 10 plus years. And also just ask each other the questions that maybe we forget to ask. So I guess there's two real answers to that question. One is hubris, right? One is ego. One is like just impulse to like take up a lot of space. And two is like, I guess we didn't give a R-rated disclaimer.
Do it now.
we might be using a swear word or two, but so just for those of you who have children listening in. So, I think we were probably both on one level kind of raised, I mean, through art school by modernists and by young abstract expressionists, right? Like the younger end, the later generation, but most of that was like old white guys kind of telling us how to paint or telling us how it was, and so sometimes my mantra is just like, fuck those guys. But also I love those paintings. So That's those are the two real answers to that question. Thanks, Michelle.
Cool.
Do I get to ask you a question?
Yeah, go for it.
Cool. Let's see. I have a long list, so let me choose. Ooh. Okay. So we're both highly influenced by the books that we've read as children. Does the work that you made in this show fall in the realm of young adult? Or is there anything R-rated? And I was thinking about sort of the abject horror that we probably read into a lot of those books. And then even in the things that you're talking about seeing, like watching the insurrection on January 6th.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like that question. That's good. Because I don't have, of course, like a solid answer, but it's something I've been sort of obsessively wondering about myself with this new body of work. So I think that at the end of the day, I'm drawn to literature that crosses those genres and just sort of ignores them. And so I think that I'm interested in sort of this primary, this ability for the work to kind of function in a large way for young children. Like I think about children as an audience a lot because I have one in my house, and it's always my aesthetics always kind of leaned that way. I'm just so heavily influenced by animation and children's books and stuff. This year I've been sort of thinking about texts like old classics, kind of looking at Peter Pan, also being horrified by Peter Pan, but looking at other like old literature that was very real with children in a way, that didn't shy away from certain sort of truths. And I like where we've evolved as a society in terms of our understanding of like how to safely like bring children into truth, But at the same time, I think children have a great capacity to understand and to be able to encounter like complex things. And I'm interested in presenting thing that, can pull you in and you can feel enchanted by it and maybe a little scared, like, yeah, like it needs to be sort of Tim Burton-ish or, I don't know. But yeah, so I could go on about all the influences who I look to like that, like Sean Tan and people that do that really well.
And maybe that eases us into this collaboration that we worked on in the show, because I think we were both like, we were just talking so much about, we were talking about the nothingness from the Never-Ending Story. We were talking about the horrors of Peter Pan. We were talking about Disney. I don't know if I have a good.
Well, what about you? Share a little more about your influences and kind of where you feel like you fall on that spectrum of, young to adult.
Oh, that's a good question.
Or just your influences.
Well, maybe if I answer Renee's question in the chat, that'll help me get to your question. So Renee asks if I'm watching the events on the island, but he's questioning if that's passive. And when I seem anything but, thanks Renee, can I speak to that? Maybe you've created the island, the world is your action. So I think I don't feel like a creator. It is sort of passive. I'm sort of pretending like this thing is happening and I'm just watching it and sort of documenting it. Maybe I feel like Sebastian at the end of the never ending story that really like it's all up to me, or
The movie or the book, Lauren?
well, how about in the Mary Martin version of Peter Pan, which is also problematic, there's this moment where Tinkerbell is dying, right? And we all have to clap to bring her back to life. Where am I going with this?
Are you're the audience clapping?
Yeah. And I was so scared as a kid that if I didn't clap, Tinkerbell was gonna die.
Oh, fascinating.
Does that answer both of you and Renee's question?
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think we could go on and on about this stuff, and like in a lot of our prep conversations, I felt like we got really stuck, or I did, like we would try to dissect some of our relationships to these narratives, and I guess for me, that is why, right, like they become images, because I'm like, I am fixated on what they mean to me, but it's just, it's really hard to articulate, but drawing them and kind of visualizing them helps. Maybe.
We also probably, I think we talked about this a lot, like we feel like bad feminists for what we love.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know for me, it's been a huge process, like, kind of unpacking and learning how to kind of dive into those narratives and take what I want to take and critique what I want to critique, and not burn it all away, but learn how to remake it, learn how to introduce new possibilities, building on the creative kind of lineage, right, that there is. Yeah. So what about isolation this year? What has that meant for you? What have you learned?
I think I need to turn that back on you, because over this past year of this pandemic, you've been the most productive artist that I'm aware of, maybe. So if you can share your secrets with us, then maybe I'll tell you what I've learned.
Well, I think it's really easy to look at someone and think they've been really productive. I became really aware of my own relationship to productivity, which is not always healthy for me. And the beginning of the pandemic was, I was working like feverishly, both at my day job and in the studio, because I think it was a coping mechanism for, I already kind of live with a lot of anxiety, and the pandemic certainly kicked that into a new realm. So, but I also had just, right before the pandemic hit, I had just kind of entered a new phase where I'd been living in Port Townsend for a year. Life had sort of shifted and changed and slowed down in this really positive way for me. And I had gotten some footing in the studio. I had a studio, and I just, like, it caught me at a moment where I was like, I was ready to just keep making, it's just where I was when it happened. And yeah. And I have a really good therapist. That helps a lot.
I think I benefit from your therapist, because I can treat you like my therapist. So coping. That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I think, that's what drawing is. Drawing and painting, it's therapeutic. It is that. And also just like I've been consuming so much. I've been listening to audiobooks just like constantly in the studio. And yeah, this year has just been a chance to sort of also just kind of unpack a lot of things that have happened in the past few years that I hadn't had time to process. So what about you?
I definitely enjoyed the period of hibernation before this show. I think I was still sort of happily painting away, but um, didn't want to participate in my own sort of big exhibitionist instincts, like the need to share and put things out there. Um, I think because of everything that's happening politically, um, I was wanting to just watch that and not also put myself out there, um, if that makes sense, and just like letting my ego rest and not feeling that sense of urgency. We both came from the East Coast, um, and the pace of life here has been a little hard for me. Things are a little bit slower, I can say, and so this past year has been just me being enjoying the Northwest pace. Um,
Mhm,
and of course, we've both had to spend a lot of time on Zoom. I've been teaching full time, and
mhm.
it does take it takes a lot more energy in a different way than I thought, and has made me tired in a different way, and has also slowed down how much time I spend um, with the professional parts of trying to survive as an artist.
Yeah.
So less time applying for things, and there's less things to apply for.
Yeah. Well, and we also each have our own types of families that we have balanced. And I want to just say thank you to my partner who has let me sort of live this dream of making art alongside my job, which, that's not always an ideal balance. But the fact that I get to do that and have that time has been because I have someone who's been able to stay home with the little one. And you've been all over the place. You and I both, I think, change locations a lot. You have a couple studios. Can you talk about your? I'm just going to jump right into this.
Yeah.
Just your kind of your process. I want to hear about like your swimming and your periods of research and like how did you kind of get to the point with maybe this last body of fish or the newest work you've made? Like, what did that look like for you?
Um, Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I do. So I do spend a lot of time swimming. That's kind of my church, the place that I go when I can. And I do a lot of sort of visualization even while I'm swimming. And I normally I would swim like at the pool one day and then I'd swim open water the next day. And it was over the past several years of living in Seattle, it's been a balance between pool swimming and open water swimming, but um, the pools have been closed. So I haven't been swimming in the pool. I've been swimming outside, and uh, over the past year, I think I've felt like nature was like taking it back, like taking us back, taking the planet back. And so um, I've been seeing a lot more schools of fish and been a part of more what we would call bait balls. And those bait balls have inspired me to make some of the paintings that are in the show that I didn't have great photos of yet because they're brand new, which are all based on feeding frenzies. And, even though we're in the Northwest and it's like cold and gray, often swimming feels very tropical and it feels like, a little bit dangerous, but also very calming. And so it's an important part of my day when I can get out there. Um, I feel like my answer leads into a question in the chat.
All right,
Um,
pull it in.
So Kathy asks, both of you reference an ecological environment that your worlds and narratives exist in. Your palettes are highly saturated. Do you find that the Pacific Northwest influences some of your narratives? Do palette choices come into play here?
Me?
You also have this giant blue swirl.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think they definitely do. It's hard to stay conscious of it for me. The way I use color in my pieces is almost as a tool of contrast, you know, so I tend to work right in these black and whites, and then the not all of them, but a lot of them, it's like the backgrounds become this opportunity to sort of bring in the voice of color. And so the colors for me, I feel like aren't quite so local, at least not obviously. Like they're more related to pigment and more related to, I kind of think of them as being related to mineral, in terms of how they connect to the environment. And then, but symbolically, I like to use them to just kind of pull in an emotional charge. There's a number of them that I'm kind of using it to suggest or play with what an altered sky would be. Definitely the fires that we've been experiencing have had an intense, effect, like on the way I think about coloring the sky and the way I want to reference like what is happening and what could happen. And so, yeah.
And controlling mood maybe too, right?
Yeah. I mean, they're very intuitively, and they're very intuitive in the way I choose them. Like I don't spend a lot of time thinking about all those reasons. Like when I'm grabbing the paint, like it's more of an impulse. But definitely, I mean, the green, like being around so much green it's hard not to be affected by that for sure.
There's something about being wet all the time too, that like feeling saturated with the moisture too, that makes me want to like saturate things with color. I think I wanted to do that in the gallery when we were working on the floor collaboration. We were very actively trying to pull in specific colors from paintings on both halves of the gallery and both of our works. And the weather was crummy, and I think it felt like we were trying to bring the floor up.
Yeah, there's something interesting because I've been thinking a little bit about how, like, right, the Pacific Northwest is both very gray and can be so dull, and at the same time can be so rich and saturated and colorful. It's and maybe that has something to do with how I'm moving between grayscale and color in my work, maybe.
Yeah, at first when we talked about doing this collaboration, you were like, okay, you do this and then I'll do all the black lines.
Yeah. It's my comfort zone, especially when I'm around someone like you who uses color with such ease. Like, yeah, I don't know. I have to tread a little carefully with color. I'm still shy. That might change.
Well, it was a real blast.
Should we open it up to the group? If there's more, that's nice. We've been able to answer questions.
Yeah, and there's one here now that you didn't actually go into, so this is actually a really good segue. And the question is from Shaw Osha, and she talks about the similarity between your work and the interaction of elements. And she says Lauren's is more about frenzy, conflict, overlap, and Michelle's is more about fractals, growth, teetering. how do you see these interacting elements in each other's work? I'm sure you've thought about this.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you want to go first, Lauren?
Well, I was thinking about your, um, if you remember while we were installing, I forgot the word vines. I couldn't remember that word. And I was thinking about your crinoids, which I also grew up with, of course, in Indiana. Um, and so I think, Shaw's right. Thanks, Shaw.
Yeah. Yeah, you said it, Shaw.
I put any holes in that. And so when we were working through that collaborative piece, I was certainly looking at Michelle's fractals. I was looking at her growth. I was looking at her relationship to those vines and the crinoids, and trying to we were both trying to sort of weave back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I was in the gallery with a group of friends yesterday, I think we've also noticed, and then when we were installing it, we were conscious of how the different sides of the room felt, right? Because yours, they're aggressive in this wonderful way, in the ways you've described, that they're, and then mine are, they're much more about going in, there's, when I compare them, I think that, I'll draw on an iPad and I'll get into trouble because I'll just keep zooming in and adding more detail, as I zoom in. And then by the end of it, I've got this awful large file that no one's going to appreciate the detail that's all the way on the inside. But so yeah, but I also just like the way Shaw put it. I think that I think there's a fragility in mine, and there's more of a, yours aren't fragile. What are they? They're happening. They're active. They're really, yeah.
Yeah, I think
they're muscly.
Thanks. I guess to combine those two questions, I'm always interested in color that kind of subverts the narrative or adds another layer to the story, a dichotomy, like Michelle said, to what's happening. I might take a very violent, aggressive, muscly image, but then I'll use a lot of warm colors and very, in my mind, very satisfying pattern to help subvert those things, and then the subversion maybe reinforces it.
Yeah.
And I do like this question too. There was a follow-up to, I think, what Renee was asking us about writing and creating and watching. And I don't feel like a writer, but I know I was going to ask Michelle that about, she's been, full disclosure, she's been fantasizing about writing a children's book
for my whole life. Yeah.
So I'm wondering.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Lauren. When I read that question, it makes me think of also some of my favorite authors and the way they describe, the story and the characters just kind of coming, right? And I did take a nice chunk of time. Shout out to Gloria Lamson for letting me borrow her little studio before I had a space where I could go and be alone with my head, back before the pandemic. And I spent a lot of time there trying to flesh out this narrative that felt like it was coming, and it's still there, and it's still waiting for me. It's gone through several iterations, and it involves these places that are in these paintings, and characters that are not seen here, but might pop up later in an animation that I'm gonna make, hopefully with the help of some other people on this call. All my co-conspirators are here and I love it. Because I need help, because it's a process for me. Understanding my relationship to writing is something that I'm going to be focusing on a lot this year. I've been fortunate to, talk with people like Ricky DeCornay and Natalie Goldberg, who have been mentor figures for me in a big way in terms of how the writing process can relate to the art process. And I'm starting to see them merge. And that's all I can say about it. I don't have a definite answer. It's just one day.
And you're in a wonderful community with a long history of writing and writers and poets. And
Yeah. I have no excuse.
So maybe this question from Donna is good for you too. The language that a novelist uses.
Yeah. That's the one. That's the one I was responding to. Did you want me to say more about it? Or
No.
okay.
It felt like a natural question for you.
Yeah. Anything else, everybody? You all falling asleep?
Actually, Meg, do you mind? Could we play the full video again?
Oh yeah, let's watch the time lapse.
Sure.
Or the walkthrough. Which one are you referring to?
Oh, the walkthrough.
The walkthrough? Sure, let me do that. And I was going to ask a process question of you, Lauren. And that is, you do small studies, of which there are some there, and I'm such a process freak. I love seeing that, So explain a little bit about that. So do you do a number of small studies, and then like the chosen one gets to get big, and then is it made big faithfully, or is it a jump off point?
Oh, thanks, Meg. That's a good question. Yes, I definitely do a lot of small studies. I got better at that when I had my first studio in Seattle and Ballard, which was so small. I kind of got better at obsessively like working very small and making a lot of studies and sort of feeding my own needs by drawing and painting a lot on a small scale. But yes, I do a lot. They are often are faithful or aren't faithful. I think it depends. I enjoy, or it's more natural for me to work large. It feels better moving around and like laying things out and kind of freehanding things at a large scale.
Mhm.
But I get like
the small ones make you freer to go big in a way.
yeah, or they sort of satisfy a need, or especially if I only have like an hour or two. But yeah, lately I just like all I care about is fish. And before that it was snakes, and before that it was lizards, and before that it was roosters, and before that it was horses, and then before that it was like really muscly male athletes doing MMA and playing football, and like doing, some of those paintings were based on the Herndon Monument climb, which is in Annapolis and is a first year plebe ritual where all the men on campus, there's a few women too, I should say, but they grease the big obelisk in the middle of town, and they all have to kind of strip down and climb it. It's a competition, and then the winner is expected to like be a natural leader for that graduating class. I could not get over that for a really long time, and so I did like millions. I spent a whole summer in Italy like drawing this Herndon Monument climb. Like, what are these guys doing? I have to figure it out. So that's a long answer to your question. Maybe I have a question for Michelle that I'm interested in asking, and she may not be interested in answering. So maybe if Meg, if you could play that video, we could kind of talk over it since there isn't any sound.
Sure. And then there is another question as well that just came in, if you want to take a look at that as well. So-
I see a raised hand,
Oh,
and
you
I'm happy to hold my question.
Oh,
and
Ricky raised your hand. So.
Hear
Rick-
me, I'm not sure if I'm
Hi.
doing the right things, okay. Well, but the work is so gorgeous and it's cinematic, theatrical, and you've both very briefly mentioned film. And I was curious about your reveries when it comes to film, if you're thinking about that at all.
Yes. Thank you, Ricky. And it's you I have to thank. I was doing my inventory of most influential films, and you're the one who told me to watch Fantastic Planet. And I watched that and I was like, oh, this is the world that I can get on board with. Yeah. For me, it's animation. It's Miyazaki films and who else? Cartoon Saloon has these amazing new films that are coming out. Song of the Sea, and so that's been informing a lot of the way that I am thinking about depth and sort of figure ground relationships. And I really love the languages and the kind of innovations that people use in animators. People use in animations. So those are some of my big film and somatic influences. How about you, Lauren?
Yeah, thanks, Ricky. I've heard a lot about you, so I'm excited to hear your voice. And I think, Michelle and I over the years have either seen films together or gone to the theater back in the day, and told each other to watch things. And we were trying to talk about this while we were working collaboratively. There's things that we both like, and then things that we like one will like and one won't like. And I'm trying to think of like a good example.
Well, we were talking about some really dated examples, right? Like some old things that maybe like we kind of hinted at before, right? Like okay, I'll admit it, like I watched Avatar and I was like spellbound by the scenery, right? Got lots of problems with it, and it took a little waking up to see them all, but and I've had this discussion with other dear friends who have helped me have a more critical eye of like narrative in story. But yeah, Lauren and I were talking about how Lauren is, like many people I know, good at paying attention to character, significance and weight in films, whereas I'm going to be watching like what's happening around them. And, I want the spotlight to be like on the buildings and trees, but
that's good. That makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, I'm definitely not as, I'm more seduced by like what bodies are doing to each other. Like I'd be more excited about like conflict and watching the things that I find seductive, which is like sort of the human condition. So
yeah, I appreciate those things too, by the way. I'm not anti-human.
no.
So while Meg is showing this, there was that other question that was about our own entangled relationship, right? Which is fun to talk about. And do you want to take a stab at that, Lauren, in terms of how you think we are entangled?
Yeah, I mean, I hear your voice in my head in the studio, right? You're a good kind of gut check for me, as are a lot of close friends that we've made over the years. I particularly cite the residency where we met because I made so many close friends through that space. Some of them are on this call with us. Yeah, I mean, I trust you implicitly. Like, I love your family. I have lived vicariously through you, and even through the work that you make, and then through the choices that you've made too, in your work. And I love that we're probably both always like a grass is always greener. Like, let's get to the next thing kind of people.
Yeah, we both, it seems like, do well with change to a good degree. I'll say that I feel like you've always been an important anchor for me. I've always had a full-time job on top of a artist practice. And then I became a mother. And I would say that throughout that, your friendship has been an important, one of many friendships that's been important for kind of helping me stay connected to that part of myself that has a strong, desire to make. And so, yeah, I think just something about how we've ended up in these cities and we've been able to hang out in each other's physical spaces. And your practice, because you work in such a studio-based way, right? Like, I just have all these memories of all the different places, like I've hung out in your studio and just been surrounded by your work, and have gotten to just sort of live with your work in that way. And, my daughter gets to do it too, and so yeah, I could gush more and more. I think you model for me, an important path, and model what it looks like to prioritize art making in your life, and to go for it. And that's really helpful for when you're balancing lots of things, to have someone who helps you see that.
Well, I appreciate that. I think you've devoted so much of your professional life to helping other artists. And so, it's about time that we get to do it this way. And I've learned so much through you helping these other artists. And like, you know so much about different types of practice and the different ways that artists work. And you've facilitated that through so many different institutions. And so I've always benefited looking over your shoulder in that way.
Yeah, it's funny. So, like, while I've been working in all these museums throughout my career, that's been happening while you've been going on all these residencies, right? And then I get to become a residency manager, and suddenly things start to entangle a little better. Like, I think for a while it's just like watching each other and touching base, and now it feels, yeah, we're even more connected. Well, I think we're getting close to our time, huh?
Yeah.
Sure.
I was just going to say a word about the show and the hours and how long it's going to be there. So if you haven't had a chance, to those of you that are in town or can be in town, I'm really happy that we made the decision to keep it up for 2 months. Really is so much more sensible. I mean, let's have time to go see it more than once even, or have more talks and interchange about it. So I'm really glad about that. It is up on northwindart.org website. You can watch the show. The tour that you were just watching, it will be there, and the time lapse, which is super fun. So all those things are there and will be there. So go take a closer look at all of that. And also on the website, if you would consider donating to help support programs like this, it does take a lot of staff time and organization. So they're not free to us, but I'm really glad we can offer them freely. It's a really part of what we do. So so if you can give a shout out and donate, and I really appreciate the thoughtful conversation. It's so good. It's so great. From a process junkie. I love it.
Thank you so much, Meg, and thank you to Northwind for being safe and conscientious in this time. If you do if you do get a chance to visit the gallery, I think it's up to 10 people at a time. And
That's right. And we're open Thursday through Monday, noon to 5. Those are the hours. Yep.
yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And yes, it is going to be, the recording's going to be available, right, Meg?
Yes, so this will be posted on our YouTube channel, and I'll make sure the link gets onto the website as well. So probably tomorrow sometime. Yeah, so great. Well,
And thank you to
everyone.
Michael for saying yes to us painting in the space and
Yeah.
letting us use.
Yeah, it was great. I don't think anyone has done that before in my memory. So
Well, we learned there was another floor piece
was great.
on wood, and ours is not on the floor, just so everyone knows. I mean, it's on the floor, but it's on a ram board.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, and have a lovely rest of the evening.
Thank you. Bye, friends. Love you.
All right, thanks. We miss you. We miss all of you.